afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming today. We are here to talk about 4 Beethoven sonatas, the 3 works of Opus 10 and Opus 13, the so-called famous Pathetic Sonata. Probably many of you have been here a few months ago when we talked about the first 4 sonatas, Opus 2, numbers 1, 2, and 3, and the E-flat major sonata, Opus 7. It is no coincidence that I'm trying to present the Beethoven sonatas in chronological order. Some people may agree with it, some people don't. I couldn't care less. Because I really believe in this presentation. Among the 32 Beethoven sonatas, there is really not one weak piece. And certainly, if you do a cycle of Mozart sonatas, or especially of the wonderful Schubert sonatas, then a chronological order is not entirely convincing or logical. Schubert's sonatas at the early stage especially are rather similar because he was fighting with the form, he was fighting with the idiom of the piano sonata, and especially the way he tries to solve the reprise, the recapitulation of the sonata form. It takes a while. So therefore, this is no criticism because I don't think anybody loves Schubert more than I do. But with Schubert, certainly, and with Mozart, it makes sense to mix the early, the middle, and the late sonatas. And you can certainly do that also with Beethoven, but to me it's much more interesting and fascinating to observe the development, the evolution of this great genius and one of the greatest pianists of all times and the greatest writers for the piano. I started with the exposition of the C minor sonata, Opus 10, and as with the first piece of Opus 2, which I remind you of course most of you know it very well, but you have this so-called Mannheimer rocket. It's a triad, an ascending triad. It's called Mannheimer because Mannheim, this wonderful residential town in central Germany, had been the home of many important composers, contemporaries of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, such as Karl Stamitz and Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf. And this kind of ascending motive is their invention. And it is like a motive, a rocket, because it shoots up into the sky. So today we think of weapons of mass destruction, but this is not destructive. Now, we can also think of Mozart themes which are very similar to go towards the tonality of C minor, because that's what Beethoven will be using. Here is the beginning of Mozart's great C minor sonata. And I could cite several other examples. Now, this F minor sonata that I first played of Opus 2, this is a simpler form of the Mannheimer rocket. Now, with the C minor, Opus 10, Beethoven starts with a very thick chord, 7 voices. look at how Mozart starts the C minor sonata. It's in unison. And anyway, Mozart's writing for the piano is always very transparent. Beethoven has a different approach to the piano. He writes for the fist, for two fists, really. I mean, this kind of... This is unimaginable in Mozart. Later, Schubert... Schubert paid homage to Beethoven here. So we have a heavy chord, and we have very dramatic dotted rhythms. He could write just as well. But with the dotted rhythm, it's more dramatic. And then comes a great contrast, the sighing motive, sospiro. The sonata form is, to me, one of mankind's greatest inventions, certainly in music. It's a wonderful way to express drama, different characters, different sonorities, and contrasts. It's very, very dramatic, and I don't think that anything similar had been invented in music, and I hope that composers don't think today that the sonata form is finished. I mean, certainly people are still writing pieces called sonatas, so there is still some hope. These Opus 10 sonatas have been written almost immediately after the preceding ones. There is only a gap of 1 or 2 years in between. What has Beethoven done between Opus 7 or between Opus 2 and Opus 10? Not very much. I mean, I could really think the Opus 5 cello sonatas, two wonderful masterpieces and very different, and certainly the string trios, Opus 9, 3 of those. These are the towering masterpieces of this period. But the piano remains his instrument and his means of expression. He had been a wonderful pianist. He just arrived to Vienna from his native Bonn, and he wanted to make an impression in the Viennese saloons, in house concerts, etc. But whereas Opus 2, dedicated to his master Joseph Haydn, it's not a very fancy dedication, only Joseph Haydn gewidmet. Not very polite, actually, because Beethoven very naughtily said that from Haydn he hadn't learned a thing. I mean, this is simply